In this episode, we're talking about what you need to know to choose your executor.
Today, going a little bit into dealing with executors. How do you decide who your executor is?
It's an important decision.
Yeah, it's been something that's been coming up a lot, just in the fact that we've been doing a ton of estate planning work, given where demographics are and what's on people's minds. So, felt that this is a good time to do an episode around some estate planning and how to pick your executor.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it. I mean, age, how much you trust them, things like that, of that nature, what their qualifications are. So lots to go into on this topic.
So start, Grant, by going into how do you name your executor? What do you have to do to make sure that the person that you want to be that executor is the executor?
Yeah, first and foremost, you name them in your will. So if you don't have a will, you have to get a will to name your executor. So get a will in place. Go see, we do the estate planning work on our team up front, but ultimately a lawyer, and preferably an estate lawyer, is going to have to execute a will for you, in which case, in which document you're going to name who your executor is. Now, going into that, though, I would suggest you speak to your executor, who that person is, and make sure they know that they're your executor, because you don't want any surprises around it after you pass away, because frankly, there's nothing you can do about it at that point. So it's always good to have a conversation with them about it first.
When we talk about executors, I think a lot of people that aren't as familiar with this think to themselves, what the heck does an executor do?
Yeah, good question. Now, this is something that we help out a lot of our clients with as they become executors, or as our clients pass away, we work with their executors. Mm-hmm. So essentially what an executor does, though, is they organize everything after you've passed away. I mean, they're named in your will, and they basically have to gather up all of the assets and know where it is, and ultimately create the plan around how it's going to be distributed to your heirs. They have to pay the taxes on your estate. They have to make sure your final tax return is being completed. So they're really in charge of your estate, if you will, and responsible for all of the liabilities against your estate. They're responsible for distributing the assets to the beneficiaries, but they're really essentially in charge of your estate.
This is a big question here. People who are maybe an executor to someone's estate often don't really know what type of commitments involved in being an executor. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it used to be that if you were named an executor, you'd feel this great honor because it was like you were in charge of the estate and you were being trusted by the person who had left you in this role. Most people today don't look at it as so much of an honor. It's much more of a liability to your life because it can require a great deal of time in any case. So from a time perspective, in terms of length, in some cases you're looking at it usually at least a year-long commitment, but you might be looking at 2, 3, even longer years.
Yeah, we've seen longer.
Yeah, it just really depends on how complicated the estates are. When there's things like corporations and just more complicated tax situations to wind up, if there's lots of assets that need to be distributed, there can be some really complicated situations that require a great deal of attention and time. So we've seen them last many years, like 3, 4, 5 years even. And it's just a function of time. And we've seen them wrap up within a year on very basic estates, but you're looking at a minimum a year. And in often cases, it's about 2 or 3 years to wind up an estate. But, I wouldn't go into this, I wouldn't take on the role of an executor lightly. Make sure you know what you're getting into. And for those of you who are asking somebody to be your executor, it's good to set their expectations as well, because you don't want them dropping the ball after you're gone.
So, into that, we have defined kind of 5 qualities you should look for when trying to determine who your executor is. The first, obviously, being a person that you trust.
Yeah, so important. Frankly, you are relying on this person after you're no longer around to make all of these very important decisions for you, and to make sure that what your best interests were and are, even at the time, are being handled. So what your best wishes were, they're going to be carried out. So trust is incredibly important.
The second recommendation that we've seen is select someone who lives reasonably close to you.
This one may seem less important now in this age of technology and with new communication technology especially, but it still can be somewhat easier if the person lives close to you. I've seen estates being managed from 2 provinces away by an executor, and so it's not as uncommon as it used to be. But at the same time, if somebody is really close to you, they live close to you, it does make things a little bit easier because they get to meet with the professionals that you're working with, your accountant, your financial advisor. And presumably those people are in the same city usually. So it can be a benefit to have them close. Not necessary, but it's a benefit if nothing else. So.
Third thing to look for in selecting an executor is someone who understands, to a certain level, finance, tax, deals with professionals, is comfortable dealing with professionals.
Yeah, I mean, again, not necessarily prerequisite, but it certainly helps. I mean, if they have a good understanding of, at least a similar understanding that you have of investments and tax, it's going to make the process a lot easier for them. Otherwise, it can be very overwhelming. I mean, if they don't have, if you have $1 million of investments that are invested in, individual stocks, et cetera, and they don't have any investments, and they've never had any investments, then they're not going to really understand how that whole process works. So it can be very overwhelming for them, very stressful as they're trying to accomplish your wishes. So I would say, it'd be nice if you could find somebody that has at least equal knowledge as you have over tax and investments and things of that nature. And if they have more knowledge than you, even better, but it'll certainly make their life a lot easier.
For a suggestion, deal with someone who's organized and can get things done.
Yeah, you want somebody that's good at executing because there's going to be a lot of little things that need to be done. There's some big things too, but there's a lot of little things. You want somebody who's organized. You want somebody who's good at getting things done. So don't pick the person that generally has problems. Like you see them procrastinating like crazy because that can mess things up quite a bit. But just make sure that you're working with somebody that you feel comfortable with in accomplishing the task at hand.
The last one being, pick someone who you believe, or with good reason, that they will survive you.
Yeah. So a very common situation we see is, and we correct it, is somebody picks their brother or their sister to be their executor. The problem with that is they're often very similar in similar age groups. So the problem with that is they may, if you live into your 80s and 90s, they may predecease you, and if you don't update your executor, then they're no longer around to administer your will, or they're not in a good headspace to do it. They're no longer capable, perhaps, too. So it's often best. We often recommend choosing somebody that's younger than you at a certain point. I mean, it's difficult to do if you're a young. If you have a young family, you're not going to pick your child. So in that case, it might be a little bit different. But make sure you're picking somebody that is likely to outlive you so that when the time comes, they're available to actually be the executor.
Some additional add-ons and things to consider when going through the process of naming your executor. The first being, consider naming a professional as your executor.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said, this is not necessarily some great honor for somebody, and in fact, it's going to be a lot of work for them. So if you have a very complicated estate, or potentially a very complicated estate, again, maybe lots of assets, corporations, things of that nature, complex tax situations, rather than overwhelming somebody that you care about, you might want to consider a professional executor. So trust companies, there's a number of trust companies in the country that do this. We have one that we work with that will administer the estate for you, and it becomes very black and white at that point. I mean, there's just very little emotion involved on their end because they're just a paid-for service that does a very good job of making sure your best wishes are taken care of.
Exactly, it's their job.
Yeah,
the tasks that get done. If you don't feel like you have someone who maybe can handle it, great opportunity to bring in a professional and make sure things are done properly.
More and more of our clients are choosing this simply because they don't want to burden a family member with the job, and so it's a really good option, and we'd be happy to talk more about it.
Another thing to consider, naming more than one executor, so a co-executor.
Often, again, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't want to leave yourself without an executor because then things could get a little dicey. So having a second executor could be a good solution to that problem. It also could help alleviate some of the stress on just one person. from having to manage the entire thing themselves. So you might want to consider having a co-executor. I'd be careful about that because
it comes with its disadvantages as well.
It could create disputes, and you don't want your executors fighting over things. So again, there's some different challenges with it, but it certainly is an option that a lot of people consider, especially when they have multiple kids that are qualified for it. So it's something to consider.
Last thing to consider: name a backup.
Yeah, again, just going back to my last point about co-executors, if you have a backup in place, if in the unlikely event maybe, but if your original executor passes away before you do, if you've got a backup in place, then they can take care of the job. I mean, even if they were to pass away after you, but the estate still hasn't been settled, it might be a good idea to have a backup executor. So, it's never a bad idea to have a plan B, let's put it that way. So having a backup in place is always good. And again, I would inform them of that, like just so they're not blindsided by anything, but it's always good to have open communication.
Perfect. Well, that's it for ideas and thoughts around naming your executor. One thing I want to mention before we sign off this episode is we do have an executor checklist, a package that we provide to our clients and their executors to help make the process smoother, and so that they know all the different tasks that need to be done and the time they need to be accomplished by. So that's something that we'd be happy to get out to people if they need it, and so feel free to reach out to us. Yeah, and if you have any questions about it, we run estate events and executor events, and so if you have questions about it and you'd like to attend one of those events, be sure to let us know. We'll probably be running one in the fall. Yep. So give us a shout, and we'll be sure to add you to the list and make sure you're invited out to that event. Perfect. So thanks again very much for joining us. Visit us at www.whitehoustonwealth.com, and we'll close it off. Ready? Aim. Fire.